Yes, it really, it's where, what? Just because you can't read my
We are
computer?
doing podcast 25. And we're not going to tell you actually what the subject is right off the bat. Just want you to know for the last 5 minutes, I have been doing everything I can to teach Mr. Wilson, West Coast Mike, how to speak English. And it's not working. There is a difference between using proper grammar and vocabulary to express ideas effectively and blathering in unintelligible sounds in order to have something on the record. But that's what we've been talking about for the last 5 minutes. Now, and then Mike said, why don't we record this? Because we're going to get 5 minutes down the road and say, what did we say? So if you're confused as you're watching this podcast, join the company of two that are already confused right now.
Yes, and just
Welcome.
because you don't want me to split infinitives, which I happen to enjoy doing,
You do.
what can I say? But there you have it. Because the topic is okay. I can
In the,
read this.
let's back up. Let's back up. In the
Okay.
news here in Rochester, New York,
Okay.
there is a major breaking story that is in all the media. It's on the radio, it's on television, it's taken many, many pages of the print newspaper. People have been interviewed. I mean, it's been the last 2 weeks a top story in the taking up many pages above the fold. Huge story. I'm not going to get into the details of the names of the various places, but if you want to look it up, be a good researcher and figure it out. But there is a Christian oriented uh, camping environment that involves many children, hundreds and hundreds of children over the last 30, 40 years. And one of the key leaders has been accused by teenagers who are now adults, women, of acting inappropriately or aggressively crossing boundaries and creating a sexual environment where it was really inappropriate for that to happen. The individual who's involved denied everything. This never happened. I didn't intend anybody to be uncomfortable. On and on and on. So you have the picture, and it's happening all over the country. It's
Right.
not just
Right.
religious situations, not the Catholic Church only. It is
Right.
business. It's the Me Too
Right.
movement. It's in Hollywood. It's in small business employment everywhere. The idea that there are predators who go after other individuals that are their targets. They are the prey. They are the ones to be managed, abused, attacked, manipulated, something. And the question that Mike and I had is what are the factors that go into grooming someone for that potential abuse? Whether that's inadvertent, just a style that someone has, or whether it's highly intentional and a very refined process. But that's what's in our news right now, and it's a story that comes up repeatedly in our culture and really in human culture around the world. This is a big, big aspect of life.
Yeah, and it has so many different variances in it that that's what I was trying to explain earlier when it's like where the discussion of what really is a wholesome relationship, what really is is something that um, it has real value to it, but it because we have gotten so hyper on all of this, it's really difficult to have in a lot of settings. It's difficult to have a genuine relationship that really has meaning without people looking at that from the outside and seeing it and going, oh wow, is that person grooming someone? Um, I mean, I worked in public school system forever, for years and years and years, and you want to talk about a place that's hyper sensitive about it and those things. And yes, are there bad people in that have done that? Yes, there are. But what sometimes I think people uh, we've gotten into this kind of hysteria that doesn't have any balance to it. And I think that's one of the things that you and I spend an enormous amount of time in our teaching and training is to help people come back to some sense of balance in their thinking. And we train about the five emotions. We train about dealing with perspective and behaviors and motivations and all those kinds of things. And one of the things that we talk about that is significant in this um, whole role and conundrum of bringing these things together is the reality. You have to own that. There's accountability to own who you are in your actions. Now, saying that, are there innocents? Of course, there are innocents. Okay. But so many times I think what we're looking at is we pardon the expression, but it's the old expression of throwing the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing when really something good is going on here, but we get so paranoid that we don't we don't facilitate really development of good relationships with people. And I think
So,
that has to
all
do,
right, but
yeah,
then the question then is, what makes an interaction between two individuals a good, healthy relationship versus a destructive, abusive relationship, or a predatory
right.
relationship, or a grooming? How does a good relationship become a grooming relationship, and exactly what does that term mean relative to having healthy relationships? I think one of the great challenges that we are facing in today's world is the ordinary means of developing a basis for how human relationships happen has traditionally been in the human family, whether that's a nuclear family of biological mother, biological father, biological children, or in-laws, outlaws, relatives, divorced. But it's a collective of people who function as a family, and that is disappearing for many people. Not everybody, but it's
Right.
certainly disappearing. Or it's fading from the primary model to be one of several models
Right.
in how people develop that. The question is, can we identify what would be a healthy relationship within family structures, within church settings or synagogue settings, or religious settings of any kind, or in business settings, educational settings, some kind of a corporate neighborhood settings, not necessarily the nuclear family, but where you live and play and that kind of thing. So is there a way of determining what is a healthy relationship or factors in healthy relationships, and what would be destructive or damaging factors in relationships that would be characterized as unhealthy relationships? I think that's one of the things we want to do. One of my fallback points goes to how the FBI deals with counterfeit money. You can study every version of the counterfeit forever and never get to the end of them. Or you can study the actual bill, the real thing, until you know every detail of it, and it's easy to spot any counterfeit that attempts to slide by and deceive people into using it as if it was money when it's really not money. So you either study the counterfeits or you study the authentic bill. And what the FBI does is they study the authentic bill. So my focus is, let's look at what makes for healthy relationships, and what doesn't have those factors is going to be an unhealthy relationship or destructive relationship. I think that's really how grooming works, because some aspects of grooming are really healthy modeling and transference of values from one person to another person, especially when the power spectrum is off balance. A parent to a 2-year-old, the parent has the power. The 2-year-old doesn't have the power. Some families, they manipulate it, but the parent is trying to shape the life of a 2-year-old to be like an adult.
Right.
And so they have the power and they're transferring the power. That's healthy. A boss is responsible for the environment, for policies, for accountability, for productivity. I understand all that. And employees are responsive to the boss. That's healthy in terms of the way in which business or manufacturing functions. But there will be factors that tip that relationship towards what's unhealthy or even destructive. And that's what we want to look at.
Right. And I agree with the truth one, but it's the Treasury Department that does that, not the FBI. So
when it's really bad, they call the FBI in. I'm right. Okay, it's the Treasury Department.
It just came out. What can I say?
In my mind, it's the FBI, but that's
well, okay. It's okay. You can have that way. You can have
the
it that
Federal
way.
Bureau of Engraving.
Well,
get me off this hook. Go.
Okay, truth. That's the real thing, and I think that's probably something else sometime we could talk about, of baselines of truth, of how do you make real decisions. What do you look at? But the problem we have is, you're exactly right, is that because the model has been so messed up in relationships that we don't know what the real thing really looks like. We're drowning in so many ways in our culture relationally. We don't know what it looks like. If you want, you as the audience, if you want to experience this, I would encourage you to sit down with somebody that's a 20-something person, not because they don't understand, but ask them a very simple question. What does it take to make a good relationship, period? What are the factors
question mark, not period. You're asking a question, put a question mark at the end of it.
Okay, question mark. You want me to put a double negative in it too? I can do that.
It's a period with a little snake over the top, a curl of smoke. Think of it as an Indian fire sending smoke signals. You have a period, but then you have this little.
Now you just offended everybody.
You cannot say, here's a question, period. No, it's here a question. We divert.
We do. Digress.
Same thing.
Okay.
Keep going.
So, ask the question of someone, or anybody, to be blunt about it, is ask that question. What are the factors that make a good relationship? People do not know.
All right, well, let me ask the question then. What goes into making a good relationship?
I don't know.
Oh, don't beat around the bush. You have to know. You wouldn't ask a question unless you knew the answer. No interviewer ever asks a question he or she does not know the answer to. So I know you know the answer. What is one factor that goes into a healthy relationship?
Trust. Selflessness. Risk.
Wait a minute. Don't get off trust that quick. What in the world is trust?
Well, let me back up, because this will explain more than what just that is. I'm throwing that there. So when you ask the question, how do we know? What are some of the factors that we would know or not know? I would say that it comes from a motivation of what's going on in the relationship. So the question really to ask yourself, is this other oriented? Is this other serving? Or is this self serving? Is this about self gratification with this individual? Or is this about the fact that they really are trying to help me move forward in my life in many, many ways, or even one or two ways? But it's an other orientation that is not preoccupied with the person who is helping the other individual or being in relationship with the other, which comes from a place of motivation. What is the motivation behind what's going on here? To me, that is a okay question to ask. It's a foundational question to ask. And if I would say in the relationship, you're saying, well, how do you know? How do you know if this person is grooming you? Well, to me, it's fairly simple. If what you are experiencing and you're paying attention is who is getting the most benefit out of this relationship right now, and where is this going? If you keep going in the direction you're going, who's being used, if you would, or not used? Uh, and in the power structure, those are hard questions to ask.
I get that. However, in the story here in Rochester, what was part of the complaint of the women against the individual who was one of the senior counselors and then was an executive staff person in this organization is he would say, it was a man, he would say, this staff person had a parent with cancer and she did not know how to deal with that. There was no one who could talk them through the pain they were experiencing, the tremendous fear of losing a parent. So all I did was spend time listening, providing supportive hugs, giving suggestions about how that person could help their parent who was struggling with cancer and had the possibility of dying, letting him have a shoulder to cry on. Everything was about letting this innocent young 16-year-old girl have the resources to live life. The answer to your question is the benefit was entirely for her. And the pattern was this individual provided those kinds of services for very lovely, slender, white, blonde, or redheaded girls who had tremendous emotional needs. And he would put his hands on their thighs. He would hold their hands caressingly while they prayed. It was never with boys. It was never with ugly girls. I'm using that non-offensively, just culturally. It was with the pretty girls. And eventually, when these girls started talking to each other and sorting out what was going on, they said, wait a minute, this was not about us. This flipped the entire storyline about who the savior male was, the alpha individual who had all the answers, and he was bigger than my father, and he was bigger than my brother, he was bigger than my boyfriend, he was bigger than my family, he was almost God size, and emotionally I just poured out myself. And his response is, hey, I didn't try to do that. I was just being a good leader in my environment and helping these poor, innocent, troubled kids get through a very difficult time in their life. So at the time, the girls would say, I had a good cry. I got some great strategies for dealing with problem A, whatever it was. I felt accepted. I felt loved. I felt everything that the gospel is about because of the way I was treated. Now I see I was being groomed. So, did somebody flip the story? Was he really doing that for his own get off? Or was he really innocent, not grooming people at all? It just so happened that the several hundred kids, 16 of whom have reported, but the hundreds of kids over the last 30 years that have fallen into his grasp, literally and figuratively, were the beautiful young girls of camp. They were all beautiful young women. And so now the question is, they would have answered that question. The girl is the one that got all the benefit.
Right. But it brings me back to my point is the self-servedness of what went on. If anyone was paying attention to what was happening, that pattern would not have been difficult to have seen.
It wasn't. And one staff person who worked in the office, an older woman, went to the local police and they said, if the complainants won't come in, we're not going to even write a report. And this woman who's a service person within the organization, kept ringing the bell and ringing the bell, and the environment was becoming a vacuum where the bell didn't ring.
Right.
No one was hearing it. And so now it's come out after all these years because there's some lawsuits and there's all these various forces that are playing into it. So the story gets told. And if it gets told one way, this guy is a victim of being misinterpreted 5, 10, 20, 30 years later. That's what some of the people in the Me Too movement said. Wait a minute, I was just helping this starlet. I was giving her open doors. And if she wanted to sleep with me or give me a massage or shower me with affection, that's not my fault. We had a thing and it was mutual. And you're going, wait a minute, that maybe once that might happen as a fling, but that happened 30, 60, 80, 90, 100 times. That's a pattern. That's now something that's an ingrained strategy of manipulating other people. The question is, what makes it a healthy relationship? What makes it unhealthy in terms of how is a person groomed? And part of it is when a person's 14, when a guy is 14 and a girl is 10.
Right.
Can the same actions be taken that are deemed extremely unhealthy, but they're not at all unhealthy when it's a 34-year-old male with a 30-year-old female that meet to try and find out, are we compatible? Do we want to date? Do we want to connect with each other? Do we want to get married? Do we want to spend our lives together? So you have a 34-year-old engaging in relationship strategies with a 30-year-old compared to a 14-year-old with a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old with a 9-year-old.
Right.
And you can make it more extreme than that, but are the very same smooth talk, hands on the arm, hands on the waist, escalating time, isolating others, is that unhealthy for a 13, 9-year-old, 14, 10-year-old, but it's not at all for a 34, 30-year-old. It's not the events themselves. Something else makes it healthy or unhealthy.
I think it comes back to motivation of intent of what is going on here. You can't divide that out and say, well, no, you can't question my motivations. I'm going, why not? So in your illustration with this guy, you're right. The people should have listened to the lady in the office who was saying,
should
look,
have. But what happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago is now irrelevant to the reality where we're in right now. So what they should have done, could have done, might have done.
I got it.
Yeah.
But there was the picture that was there. The picture was that the motivation going on here was self-serving. The motivation was very much manipulative. The motivation was very much not other-oriented. It was self-oriented. The older woman saw that.
But the man and the girl would deny that that's true at the time. So let's just say the staff person who reported is about to get fired because she's really a lousy servant.
Right,
This woman's not, but lousy servant. She's about ready to get fired, booted out, and it's going in her file jacket. And she decides she's going on the offensive and go after the president of the corporation
right,
and make all these reports. And then people say, she should have been listened to. And you say, wait a minute, holy cow, something else is going on here. So if the guy is saying, I'm only trying to help, I'm trying to be a listening ear to troubled kids, that's what you do in Christian camping and intervention services is you listen, you care, you provide a shoulder on which they can cry, you have counsel, you give scripture, that kind of thing. And
so
in our organization, what we said is males do that with men in open settings,
right,
always two people or
right,
more,
right,
always same gender. And I realized we can end up with gender-based issues as well, but men don't provide that to young girls.
exactly.
Women provide that to young girls,
Right,
and they don't provide it one-on-one in isolation. If that person needs to see a clinical counselor, there are all kinds of boundaries that are set up around the clinical
right,
situation. Can it happen there too? Absolutely, yes, but that's not what we're talking about.
right,
But to be able to say, here's a girl whose parent is dying of cancer, refer that girl. First conversation, first 5 minutes. I want you to talk to my wife about that.
right,
I would like you
right,
to see one of our adult female counselors. I am not going to hold your hand. I am not going to pray with you. I'll pray for you, but I'm not going to be praying with you, bowing our heads, eyes closed, touching each other's hands. There's something in the provision of resource itself
right,
that can be abusive or grooming.
right.
It's like
So that,
giving candy to a baby. The baby is always, not always, but is going to respond positively to the sugar because biologically they're wired to respond to sugar. So if you give candy to a baby, that baby is going to respond in a predictable way. You have very helpful, caring, loving, generous kinds of gifts that you give, they're going to respond. But if you do it in a group setting, you talk to 3 girls or 4 girls, 2 girls, 1 guy, and another adult counselor, you provide the same counsel, the same prayer, but it's done in a way that defuses or disempowers
right.
the one-on-one. It's really the one-on-one that becomes unhealthy.
Right. And I think the question in those settings, the question is, would to me, I mean, if you're looking at that situation, 20, 30 years ago, but even back then, the red flag would have been to me is that, okay, first off, you're exactly right. Why are you doing this one-on-one behind closed doors? That's the first red
Or
flag.
in isolation. One of the things I
Right,
said was he'd be in the conference room and he would pull a troubled kid off to the other side of the fireplace so you couldn't hear their voices, you couldn't see
right,
what they were talking about. And he would say, we were out in public all the time. We
right.
were never behind closed
Yeah,
doors. But there's a management of that.
exactly.
That's clearly a managed
Right,
situation.
exactly. So the greater question though comes to me and is that should have been, if you will, or could have been asked, is it so there's no girls or guys that have the same kinds of issues that you're helping all these redhead, beautiful, slender girls all the time? Why is there only one type of individual that you're talking to. And
he would say, no, that's not true. I don't even have any regard for whether these kids are beautiful kids or not beautiful kids. They're crying, they're troubled. And you say, can you be so dense as to not see the pattern of what you are selecting as part of your target young person? I never even thought about that. Never crossed my mind. I said, well, of course it crossed your mind. Are you calling me a liar? Now the whole thing is, hey, I'm the victim here. And one of the things that I watch for is whenever an individual who actually is acting in a predatory fashion, it will not take too many statements until that person says, wait a minute, I'm the victim here.
Right.
When that statement gets made, my flags go popping up. I actually do understand what's going on here.
Yep.
It's that statement that becomes critical.
Right.
I have another theory that I just thought of entirely I don't know that probably somebody's thought of this before.
Okay.
But I just thought of this and just went through an entire scenario in my mind while we were just talking the last 30 seconds.
Okay. Go.
I'll call it the skin time factor. I'm trying to think of words really quickly. I'm going to call it the skin time factor. SKINTIME. Skin time factor. How many square inches of skin touch for how long of a period of time? I don't know the box format of being able to understand where is it dangerous, but you shake someone's hand.
Right.
There is 10 square inches on your palm and 10 square inches on the other person's palm.
Right. Right.
If you want to double the amount of skin contact, not time, you put your hand on the back side of their hand. Now we have 30 square inches, 40 square inches, front and back. If that person puts their hand on the back of your hand, now it's gone by an exponent. If you're shaking hands and the zero factor is 3 pumps up and down that takes 1.5 seconds, and the person holds on for 3 seconds, you've now gone to the exponent. So there'd be a factor you could multiply. Right. So if, and I'm thinking this through even while I'm talking, so this is not really well thought out, which we probably should stop recording. Let me think about this for a couple of years and we'll come back and talk about this later. But in the skin time factor, the kind of skin relative to the heart is an exponent factor. So you touch hands, that's a factor of 1. But if you want to be more intimate, you reach out and touch the person's forearm closer to their heart when you're shaking hands. That's an exponent factor of 2. Right. If you want to be more intimate, you put your hand on the backside where their triceps is and put your thumb in the crook of their elbow and shake hands. That's now an exponent factor of 4. You put your hand on their shoulder. What you're doing is the hand is moving towards the heart. Right. When you give somebody a hug and you pat the backside of their shoulders where their clavicle or where their scapulas are, the shoulder blades are, that's got a certain factor. But you reach around further and touch close to the backside of their heart, that's exponentially big. If you shake hands with somebody and you touch the upper part of their chest, we're talking and I've seen people do this. Right. Right. Or they reach underneath the elbow and put their hand to the side of their chest. That there's a skin time factor. Right. Or you give a hug and your chests are actually touching, and they touch for not half a second, but 5 seconds, 8 seconds. Now you could multiply that out, or at least be aware we had a skin to skin contact that lasted 250 skin time factors. That is so much more intense than a skin time factor of 10.
Right.
So you're going to pray, you hold your own hands, the other person holds their own hands, or you pray holding hands for 10 minutes. Now we're talking in skin time seconds, we're talking in the thousands.
Right.
That does something to the way in which the relationship is functioning. I don't know if anybody's ever thought of that. Certainly you have an intuitive sense that hug lasted just a little too long,
Right.
or that person held my handshake longer than I was comfortable.
Right. Well,
why were you uncomfortable? It's something in that skin time.
Right. Well,
sorry for making a mess, but I'm just thinking this through. There is something about that skin time contact that one of the accusations was this guy, when he was praying, would put his hands on, they were in summertime, they were wearing shorts. He would put his hands on their knees, farther away from their heart. And as they were praying, he would move his hands up their thighs towards their crotch, but not ever get really close. And one girl said he would take his thumbs on the inside of her thighs and stroke them up and down. Now, she said, I was uncomfortable. And I didn't know why.
Right.
What I'm saying is there's something in those factors that we could actually analyze. At what point is this now dangerous? It's manipulative. It's
Right.
destructive in the relationship in the skin time factor. Somebody out there, you can think this better than I can. How can we develop a way of understanding what's going on in a relationship with skin time factor? Now, when a 30-year-old, a 34-year-old, and a 30-year-old are starting to relate and they hold hands for 2 hours, or he puts his arm around her shoulders and she snuggles up underneath, that's appropriate for bonding. That's actually healthy because it's creating the connections that work really well, where in another situation that's going to be because of the skin time factor.
Right.
Exactly because of the skin time factor.
So let me break in here, because one of the things that and I agree with it, there's a dynamic there that's really important, but we already know that if someone holds someone in an embrace for 20 seconds, our bodies release neurochemicals, and women release oxytocin, and men start releasing vasopressin, which is a neurochemical of bonding.
I just made this all up. There's science behind all this stuff?
Yes, I've been listening to you.
Connect some dots. I have no idea what I'm.
But that whole concept of, perspective of moving up and getting more and more and more. But we already know that if you are so what he was doing in that relationship, he was actually motivating and releasing in those women oxytocin, which is the maternal, if it will, it's the maternal neurochemical that bonds. It's part of the bonding process, but it also is about gratification, that it feels good because now and which affects the limbic system in your brain that says, well, yeah, I was uncomfortable, but because I went through all this and I felt really good and he helped me, and even though I was uncomfortable, what oxytocin does in childbirth particularly, it makes women totally forget about all the pain and the hassle and it's like, oh yeah, but no, that goes, oh, but it's so good, it feels so great. And that's what oxytocin does.
Which is really good for the girl, We come right
Exactly.
back to the man saying it was just good for them and made them feel good. They got through the stress. I was just trying to be helpful.
But what he did was he knew what he was doing. And that's
He says, I had no idea they were taking it the wrong way. If you're listening to this podcast, the look that Mike had on his face was priceless. Give me my Visa card. That really was priceless.
it's like, okay, really? All right, buddy. Yeah, yeah. So how do we wrap this all up today? I mean, what are we trying to help people with here? We finished this thing. Have we gotten anywhere? Have we helped anybody? Have we, are we just muddied the waters incredibly in this discussion? To me, part of what goes on here is pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on in your relationships. Even if you are, I mean, if you're a person that you know that you're needy, all right? We know that. You don't necessarily have somebody tell you that. You have, if you are needy, then it's like pay really close attention of are people, is what's going on other oriented towards you, or is it self oriented towards you that's manipulative in nature? See who else they are hanging out with. See who else is in that kind of realm. The isolation thing is a big deal. Pay attention to that.
Gender opposition is a big issue. Men counseling women, women counseling men, age differential, that's a big one. Isolation, one-on-one in a non-clinical setting without clinical protections that are built up is another big factor. Isolation physically into a separate space, a quiet conversation where nobody can overhear, when there is restriction of access, that's a big one.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I think additionally, the skin time factor, when the skin time factor starts to increase, even if you're observing it in other people, that is going to be valuable alarms when something is becoming extremely dangerous or inappropriate.
I would agree with that.
That's a starter. This is a starter. I got to think more about this. Some of our podcasts, we actually have all the answers. This one, we're coming up with more questions than we started with. That's a good thing.
All right. Well, this has been Gripping Reality. We're glad that you joined us today. And if you want to find us,
send an email. We're on YouTube right now. Gripping Reality is our show. You can write to Mike at Gripping Reality and spell it with a Y. I'll get the email with an I. Mike Wilson will get the email. We switch back and forth. Everybody, we both know everything. If you write to me, Mike, M-Y-K-E, at grippingreality.com, say, I've never told this to anyone else, and don't tell the other Mike. Too bad. I'm saying it up front. We don't keep any of those kind of things secret because that's the way we are. If you have to have a therapist to be your confidant, by all means, go and do that. Don't try and set us up against each other. It's not going to work. No. So Mike at Gripping Reality, spell it M-Y-K-E-M-I-K-E. I don't care, at Gripping Reality, and we'll interact with your email. We may talk about you on our show, or we may write back to you. It depends on what's more fun.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us today. So we'll catch you next time.
Yep.